Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm excited to celebrate the launch of a new book coming out on May 6th, Spitfires, the American Women Who Flew in the Face of Danger During World War II. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the Literary Aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Becky Aikman, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you and to meet you. This is incredible. You have this new book coming out. Can you give us a little summary?
The book is called Spitfires, the American Women Who Flew in the Face of Danger During World War II. And it is about the very first American women to fly military aircraft. They are almost completely unknown today because they were sort of forgotten after World War II, even though they were quite celebrated at that time. During World War II, the United States military wouldn't allow women pilots to fly for the military. And so there were 25 American women who took it upon themselves to bolt for Great Britain and fly there. Great Britain was alone at that time. The United States hadn't yet entered the war, and it was in desperate straits under constant attack from Germany, especially aerial attacks in the Blitz. So they were forming a group called the Air Transport Auxiliary that would accept pilots from other countries and, yes, even women. So these Americans desperately wanted to serve in the war and have this adventure and advance their flying careers. So they went across the Atlantic and joined this organization. It was one of the most dangerous jobs of the war. 1 in 7 pilots who flew for the Air Transport Auxiliary were killed in crashes. So they were very brave to do it, but also they loved to do it. So the story is one of their tremendous pleasure in participating in the war effort and also the many dangers and exciting escapades they experienced during that time.
Well, I am so excited that you came to this story, and I can't wait to hear how you did. This is a story I feel like is long overdue for the telling. We hear little bits about it in our book about the Women Air Force Service pilots, but these ladies were flying before they were. We also learned a little bit about it in a book by Kathy Mexted about Australian women pilots, because there was an Australian woman who flew for the ATA as well. So we kind of got a little taste of it in that book a few years ago when we did that in the book club. But this is definitely a long overdue telling, and I can't wait to read it and hear all about it. Before we talk a little bit more about the ATA and the book, I'd love to hear more about you. What's your background and what brings you to this story?
I was a newspaper journalist who covered a wide range of topics, and I left that business to begin to write books. I've written 2 previous books. One was a memoir called Saturday Night Widows, about how I was widowed at a young age and formed a sort of amateur support group with other young widows, and we fumbled our way through to support each other as we remade our lives. My next book was about the making of the movie Thelma and Louise. I wanted to write about how a great woman's film got made in Hollywood, because it doesn't happen very often, and what impact it had. So that was a lot of fun. But this was a departure for me, a real work of history, much more challenging for me to pull off. It took 5 years of research and writing to get it together, and my brain was on overload much of the time because it was a big, complicated story. But I wanted to make it read like a novel and be exciting and interesting for people to follow. So I worked very hard to try to make it into a great story.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about it. I'm also fascinated by the other stories. My father passed away when I was 7, so I watched a woman who was in her 30s who was a widow, and what that looked
Mm.
like for her. So I'm really fascinated by that story. And also this story about Thelma and Louise, the making of the movie. I read the blurb for that and it looks fabulous. I'm definitely going to read those books as well. I can't wait. But so why these women? Why the Spitfire ladies? Tell me about that.
I wanted to do a story about people who did something amazing, but that the public hasn't really heard about them. That's a hard thing to find because the public hasn't heard about them. But I was talking to my mother and told her this desire, and she said immediately, she said, "You should write about the American women who flew in England during World War II." I said, "Really? I've never heard of such a thing."
How did she know
And
about them?
she had been a young child and had seen something like, she thinks maybe a newsreel, possibly a magazine article. Um, and she said it made a huge impression on her. She said, "I thought they were so noble and glamorous. I wished I could do what they did."
Oh, wow.
So I started looking for it, and at first I couldn't find anything about it because it had been quite well covered at the time, but then forgotten. But eventually I did learn about this organization and got the names of some of the women and started looking into their backgrounds and gradually made my way through that way.
Yeah, well, so tell me about that research, like, and how I haven't had a chance to look at the book yet. So, how did you structure the book? What was your window into the story?
I thought by focusing on the American women, I could limit the story enough so it would be easy to follow. You could do a great book on everybody who did air transport during the war, but I thought this story of these women who left their homes, were far away from home, and had to make a life during the war in this way was more limited and therefore easy to follow.
Mhm.
I first started to do the research by contacting a gentleman named Richard Pode, who runs a tiny museum in England devoted to the Air Transport Auxiliary. And the
It's
first
and
thing,
what's the name? Where is that museum?
it's in Maidenhead,
Yes.
England,
And I am
which
wearing my
was,
Spitfire pin that I got at that museum when I visited last
of
summer.
course. So you may have met him, I'm not sure.
I might have because
Yeah.
yeah, it was a lovely visit. Yeah.
it The very first thing he said to me was, "I hope you don't plan to fictionalize this because
Oh,
nothing could be as exciting and glamorous as the reality."
good for
So I
him.
thought, this is sounding good.
That's
The very first woman I looked into was named Mary Zerbel because I heard that her papers had been donated to the San Diego Air and Space Museum. So I went there and I had pretty low expectations because the librarian said I was the only person who had ever asked to see them.
ah.
And they were these sort of dusty files that I opened, and she immediately came to life for me. I realized what a dynamic and fascinating person she was. She had been quite celebrated as the youngest woman flying instructor in the United States when she was 19. She was photographed often in the newspapers because she was very pretty. And when she went to the war, she also received great coverage because she was the first person, American serving in the war, to marry another American serving in the war. And that got worldwide coverage. And she did many other things that got a lot of attention. And in fact, after the war, Lana Turner starred in a movie based on her life. That's how exciting her life was.
Wow.
But by the time I got to the end of the file, I came across her obituary. It consisted of only 3 sentences in her hometown paper in Idaho, and it made no mention of the fact that she had ever flown aircraft.
Wow.
So I immediately decided this was my mission. I was going to make sure people heard about these trailblazing women who had somehow been forgotten.
So you started with that particular person. Is the book focused on her perspective, or do we get to learn more? How did you structure that?
There are maybe 5 or 6 who became my main characters, and then there were some others who weren't as main characters. And I tracked down a lot of them because they weren't well known enough to even have papers in museums. So I found family members And that was very challenging because I kept trying to find people with names like Ann Smith. I would just
Oh my
contact
goodness.
every Ann Smith in America
Oh,
until I hit the one I was looking for.
wow.
And these families were so excited that someone was interested, and they went into their attics and got out diaries and letters, which were very personal and fascinating, and told the stories in ways I never could have any other way.
Right.
The families also told me their stories, memories that they had been told. And I met one living pilot. She is the last surviving transport pilot of the war. Her name was Nancy Miller, and she's now 105 and still going strong. So I did
Whoa.
get to interview her in person.
That's incredible.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So in this, there's so much in there. I just wrote my next article. So I write articles for the Aviation for Women magazine for Women in Aviation International. And it's like their little book column. And there's a lot going on right now in our country and in our military, especially, in which a lot of our heroic pioneering women's stories have been removed from government websites. And so we're very grateful and privileged to have people like you who do the work to keep these stories alive in books. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize in that article is to encourage people who are on their journeys now to keep a journal, even if they don't, or if they've finished a career and they don't necessarily want to publish their own story, to write their reflections for posterity, because in this sort of fast-paced ether world, I just feel like so much can be lost if we don't have the written word. And that's what you historians, you book writers, have gone to access to tell these incredible stories. All of the handwritten letters that went back and forth, that are physical things that people can keep in their attic. you know you can't keep your digital emails in your attic and expect those to last generations. So I'm super excited that this is just another example of ways in which our stories can be told if they're written somewhere. So that's my encouragement to women today.
Yes, and I wanted to bring them to a much wider audience because I think if you were a young woman today thinking I would like a career in aviation, you would think I have hardly heard about anybody who
Right.
had careers in aviation. It's still rare now,
Yep.
but it was really rare back then. And that would be discouraging. And erasing that history only makes it more discouraging.
Right.
I would think if they knew that these women performed these incredible jobs, they were so challenging, so dangerous, it took so much courage, and they excelled at it.
Right.
I think if people knew that that was more than 80 years ago, that women were doing this, it would give them encouragement that yes, it can be done.
Right. And maybe silence some of the naysayers. We can only hope.
Well, this job was so dangerous that 1 in 7 pilots who performed it were killed.
Right.
And it was very challenging because these pilots had to fly up to 147 models of aircraft on little notice. Often they were assigned to an aircraft that they had never seen before.
Right.
They had little one-page descriptions of each one. They would read through it really fast, get in there, and take off. Now, a lot of people who are in the military are trained for one or two kinds of aircraft, and they do it over and over. And that's also a very difficult and important job.
Yeah.
But it took extraordinary skill to do this work. So anybody who did it, was a great pilot.
Absolutely. I'm one of those military pilots who was trained very methodically on 3 separate aircraft, two for my initial training, and then the one that I flew professionally. And then after I retired, I have been sort of hopping around to different aircraft, and every one of them is different. And I cannot imagine. I mean, I suppose in our test pilots, in the military specifically, are trained on many aircraft and can probably hop in and out of various ones and start them up and get going. But yeah, I've seen these crib sheets. They had them in the museum. These little tiny, I mean, I couldn't even read them with my eyesight now. And like everything that they need to know to start this thing, its flying characteristics, what to look out for is all on this tiny little crib sheet that they're handed. And then if they literally like show up to pick a plane up and they're handed this piece of paper and you know, good
Yeah,
luck.
it's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
It was also very dangerous because the British government was trying to gear up to fight this war, and they
Right.
needed an extraordinary number of aircraft fast. So these pilots would pick up aircraft at the factories when they were barely tested. So they frequently failed in the
Right.
air.
Yep.
Engines failed, parts didn't work. People had to try to glide down to land, and some people crashed.
Yep.
It was also dangerous because, in the other direction, they would pick up damaged aircraft that had been in battle. Nobody knew for sure what was really wrong with it. Doors were blown off, duct tape was holding things together, there were bullet holes in the sides, and they would have to fly these for repair.
Right.
So that made it very dangerous. In addition, they flew without instruments, and the British weather was very changeable, and suddenly they could be flying into a cloud bank and lose all visibility and
Right.
possibly smash into a church steeple or a mountain.
Right.
That was also a common problem. So it was very rarely the fault of the pilot when something went wrong.
Yeah.
But they had to be rock steady and able in these emergencies to figure out fast what to do and save themselves and save the aircraft, which many of them did.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the surprising things that you discovered in your research?
I just that they existed at all was the first surprise.
Yeah.
Um, I also was surprised at how they kept these wonderful diaries and letters. And so I had a real window into their personalities and their thinking. And I was so struck by the fact that they were very much like women today. They were ambitious for their careers. They also had to make hard decisions about how much to follow the template at the time, where women were expected to settle down, get married, not to work. They were constantly juggling their own feelings about this and trying to make decisions. So I felt like I really got an intimate look at what the lives of pioneers were like and how they had to defy the norms in many ways.
We do have, like you made reference to this, your friend at the museum saying, "Don't fictionalize it." We do have some stories out there that are fictionalized accounts, not of. Well, there is one. So we have Elizabeth Wien, who wrote Codename Verity, and then there's a sequel to it, and it's wonderful, and it gives you an insight into the ATA. We also have The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which I
Right.
thought she did a wonderful job incorporating that in a small part of a beautiful saga of a book. And then we have so you can go to my website, which is where I kind of house all the books that I can find that are on the market that feature women in aviation. You can sort there. So there are other books on the ATA like there are biographies. Mary Ellis, we read that biography of her a few years ago, and then there's a Pauline Gower biography as well, and a few others. I think there's some memoirs as well. So there are other places to learn generally about the ATA, but I think what's wonderful about this book is that it features the American women, like you said. You kind of narrowed it down to that. Do you get into Jackie Cochran's visit with the ATA in the book?
Oh, yes, definitely. Jackie Cochran was, as you know, bigger than life personality. So she's a major character in this. She was the person who sent telegrams to women who were experienced pilots, inviting them to join her
Yeah.
and go to England. And she did go and was considered the leader of the American women for a short time. But her ambition throughout was to win enough attention and accolades for these women so that she could then go back to the United States and start the Women Air Force Service Pilots, having proven that women could do air transport work. So she didn't stay long, but she cut quite a figure throughout the British hosts didn't quite know what to make of her. She was so glamorous, such a big personality, but she didn't particularly want to fly the aircraft. And they expected everyone to fly the aircraft, however
Right.
renowned they might be. So there was quite a conflict there, but she stuck to her guns and pretty much swanned around London, collecting evidence of how talented the women were so that she could go on with her ambition. Um, I do talk about the WASP during the course of the book because the women in Britain were quite interested in how that would go. They considered that they could go to the United States to do that work, but most of them thought it was much more exciting to be in Great Britain in the center of the action, in the middle of the war.
Right.
And they were also aware that the American public wasn't very supportive of the WASP. And the WASP, in fact, as I'm sure you know, ended in 1944 when the war was still raging because of public opposition to women flying. This was quite concerning to the characters in my book who wanted to have careers in aviation and were trying to develop logbooks that were so impressive that they could not be denied when the war was over and they could continue working as pilots. So it was discouraging when there was this conflict at home about women not being as respected. In Great Britain, they were highly respected for what they did, and they were granted equal pay with men, and they were qualified to fly all of the same aircraft as men up to the highest level, except for aircraft that went to Navy ships because they said there was no accommodation for women on board those ships. Otherwise, they did everything the men did, and they did it as well, or if not better, than the men. And so they felt like they were in kind of a utopia for women. They got to do the work they wanted. They got to live the way they pleased. They had very wild personal lives, some of them. Um, so it was a brief window into being able to behave the way women did decades later, making their own decisions and inventing themselves as they pleased.
Well, not to spoil too much of it, but did any of them have any success post-war in continuing their flying?
Yes, it was very tough because American passenger airlines would not hire women pilots after the war, and the US military would not hire women pilots after the war. So that eliminated a lot of the potential work for them. But these ladies were very bold and dynamic, and they managed, some of them, to find ways to continue in aviation. One of them formed a company that delivered old surplus aircraft from the war around the world in all kinds of dicey situations.
Cool.
Uh, One of them got a helicopter license, became the second licensed woman helicopter pilot in the United States, and she founded the first helicopter charter company in Alaska that was very successful.
Oh, I can't wait to read about her.
And one of them became the first woman vice president of a major US airline, Pan Am, uh,
Oh,
working her way up through the years until she reached that level. So these women were not shrinking violets. They made the most of their opportunities.
oh my gosh, I'm so excited about these characters. Again, I'm going to gush and say thank you so much for digging this story up and writing it. The book comes out on May 6th, is that right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's available for pre-order, and if everybody doesn't know already, pre-orders help raise books up sort of the selling lists. So if we can get a whole bunch of pre-orders in for this book, that'll help it, and it'll bring this story to more people. So I encourage everyone to do that. I want to talk a little bit. So, is there anything else you wanted to say about the book? Because I want to spend a few minutes talking about writing, since this is your writing and publishing, since this is your third book. So, is there anything else you wanted to say about this story before we talk about that stuff?
Well, one thing we've left out a little bit is the personal lives of the women. They
Yeah.
seized this opportunity, being far from home, to live the way they wanted. So I'll tell you about a couple of them. One of
Okay.
them was named Dorothy Fury. She was a great beauty who came from an impoverished background and only had an eighth grade education. She decided she could pass herself off however she wanted in England, and she portrayed herself as kind of an American aristocrat, by acting very imperious and recycling one red dress that she wore to parties. And she did work her way into the British aristocracy, and ultimately rose very high. And people over there still think that she was some sort of American
Oh,
heiress.
she sounds like a Jackie protege.
Uh, the two did not get along because I think they each saw through each
Surprise,
other.
surprise.
Because Jackie, as you know, also came from a very poor background and
Exactly.
became a self-made millionaire with her cosmetics company
That's
and by
funny.
marrying a millionaire.
Yeah.
So yes, the two of them were a little at odds a lot of the time. There was also a real American aristocrat. Her name was Virginia Farr, and she was a member of the family of the Western Union fortune.
Oh.
She was raised to be a debutante and was expected to capture a wealthy husband at a debutante ball. She viewed this trip to England as an escape from that gilded cage, which did not interest her at all. And she went to England and lived exactly as she pleased, having a very unconventional life. Um, there were so many of them who were so fascinating. And because I had these diaries, I had a window into their emotions and their thinking.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite parts of the book, how they navigated being a woman in general, in addition to how they navigated trying to do this work that very few women did.
How has this research and writing the book changed you?
It's made me realize I'm not as brave as they were. I can't imagine having done what they did.
Mm.
When the whole thing started, there was always talk about who would do best. Would it be the most experienced pilots? Would it be the most careful pilots? Would it be the wild pilots who
Mhm.
lived for the thrill and were willing to go out there and do the max? No one knew for sure. And I think by the end, they realized that the most successful ones had rock steady nerves. So much could go wrong, and they were the ones who could stay calm in a crisis and work through their options and figure it out and somehow get back on the ground
Yeah.
alive. And one hopes with the aircraft intact too. So that was something I learned that maybe I wouldn't be that good at it. Um, I did go up in a small plane with the niece of one of the pilots, and I'd never been a nervous flyer but before, but being so aware at that point in the story of how dangerous it was what they did, for some reason I was just suddenly struck with terror
Oh no.
flying in this small plane for the first time in my life because I knew how much could go wrong. And she asked if I wanted to take the controls, and I said, please don't. I would just melt
Oh
down.
no.
So I do admire all those people, and I've learned that I may not be brave, but I can tell the story of a brave person. So that's my contribution.
Well, bravery comes in a lot of different forms. I just want to tell you that because it, it- just from my personal experience, writing is terrifying. So some people are able to put themselves out there in the way that you have, both especially writing your own personal story, your own personal memoir of a very deeply emotional event. That takes an incredible amount of bravery. So it all comes in different forms.
Well, theirs was more impressive, let's say.
I don't know. That's all a matter of perspective. Those of us who fly every day is like that's what we do.
Mhm.
Um, so let's talk about your writing and publishing a little bit. So you wrote that first book. You were already a journalist, so you're a writer. You're trained and educated in doing that, so you know how to do that. But that's a different kind of writing to write a memoir like that. Talk about that.
Uh, it is, but I'm having a lot of experience writing every day was tremendously helpful. I mean, everybody says put your butt in the seat. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
And working at a newspaper, news breaks. You can't say, I have writer's block. I'll do this tomorrow. You have to do it now. They can't run an empty page in the paper.
Right.
So you learn to just push and get that writing done. And you have to tell yourself, if it's not perfect, I have to get it done anyway. Um, when you're doing a book, you have more time to polish it and try to make it perfect, which I enjoy very much. I still write pretty fast, and then I will go back and polish later, which was something I didn't get to do at a newspaper.
Mm.
I also like the switch to books because you could tell a really big, complex story in a book it can have a lot of elements. Like this book has so many elements. It has the characters, it has the story of the war itself, it has tales of aviation that I had to learn a lot about in order to do it. I had a sort of kitchen cabinet of vintage aviation experts that I would consult. If one of my characters had a crash, there was always a record of it at the RAF museum, but it was very brief and just a sort of a punch card. I didn't even know what the holes meant. So I had people who helped me interpret that. And then I would find people who had actually flown these aircraft who could explain to me if the propeller fell off midair, which happened to one of the pilots, what would you be seeing? What would you be hearing? What would you have to decide to do? What were your options? How did she choose the option she chose? These people could talk me through it because I wanted these stories to be accessible to readers who weren't necessarily technically knowledgeable. I wanted them to feel the story from the point of view of the pilot, what happened, what she did, why she did it. So that was very, very useful research for me, something I'd never done before, but I had to have these people helping me. And I read many specifications of aircraft. And so I would really understand, could that aircraft land on a field that small, or was that impossible? Each one of these dramatic stories of the flying took weeks and weeks of time to reconstruct for me.
Wow. And how did you find these experts?
I, I just eventually, there's a Spitfire Society in Great Britain that had experts they could refer me to about Spitfires. Um, I had someone who works on reconstructing vintage planes who knew all the parts. I consulted stunt pilots who would go to air shows and fly these particular aircraft in air shows that had vintage warplanes on display. Uh, it was a real mix of people. And then I would speak to people on the ground where the crash would occur. Um, there was one crash where I found witnesses who were still alive. They'd been children at the time, and they'd been quite traumatized by seeing this aircraft crash in the field uh,
Right.
where they lived, and they remembered the details very distinctly. And they
Wow.
were quite emotional about it. So I looked for eyewitnesses, I looked for experts, I read all the documents, I spoke to families if they had been told the story, and pilots who survived these crashes had written about it in their diaries sometimes. So I would coordinate maybe dozens of sources to do a few pages on what went wrong in one of these flying accidents.
Wow. It just sounds like fascinating research. I should have asked you this earlier, but why did you call it Spitfire?
Well, it has a double meaning. Especially back then, the word Spitfire was used to describe a feisty woman, and that's what they were. Also, the Spitfire fighter was the favorite aircraft of just about every woman who flew it. It was a legendary aircraft that was often credited with saving Britain during the Blitz, the Battle of Britain, when it was really questionable whether the country could survive. The only defense was to send up these small fighter planes against the German bombers, and they would perform dogfights and try to bring those bombers down and save people on the ground. The public loved the Spitfire because it was a relatively new aircraft that was quite successful at this. It was beloved by pilots because its design was really sleek and aerodynamic. They felt that it was so responsive. One person was quoted saying, all you had to do was think about what you wanted it to do and it would do it. It was very fast and powerful. They loved that feeling of power. One of the women said, I took off and felt like I had a kick in the pants and I was at 1,000 feet. They loved that feeling. And women loved it because the cockpit was really narrow, part of the sleek design, and they felt it was fit for a woman.
Yeah.
And another character said about it, you don't fly a Spitfire, you wear it.
Oh, I love that
Very
so
chic.
much.
And a
Yeah,
Spitfire. So it was an important aircraft, and it was an important term to describe women like these who didn't take no for an answer.
that's fabulous. That is fabulous. So how did you go about getting this book published? What was that process like?
Well, I had published two previous books, and when you do a nonfiction book like this, you don't do the whole book before you find a publisher. It's years of research. It's time consuming. It's expensive. Um, so I did enough research to know what I had, and I wrote a book proposal
Mhm.
that explained what the book would be and what information I could get. And then publishers bid on it, and the winning publisher becomes the publisher, and you get an advance, which helps to pay for all the research. So it was a very nice process. I love my publisher. They worked hard on it, and they're excited about it, and have done a huge amount of work to bring it to life. So it's gone very well, actually.
Oh, congratulations for that. And what are they doing to help with this launch? And what are you doing? What's that look like for you? Lots
Uh,
of podcasts.
yes, I've pre-recorded a lot of media that
Mhm.
I'm not allowed to talk about
Yeah.
until
No,
it
fair.
happens.
Of course.
And there are major reviews also.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a fair amount of attention to these women.
Wonderful.
Fortunately, we did time the release to the 80th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, which is May
Uh-huh.
8th.
Yeah.
And we think that a lot of the media will say, oh, it's been 80 years and suddenly we're learning about this. It's a
Yeah.
good thing we know about it. So I think there's going to be a fair amount of attention. My publisher's done a wonderful job
Excellent.
drumming that up. So my work is mostly done, but I am appearing a lot of places.
Well, that's incredible. So, where can everybody find you? Are you on social media? I know you have a website. Where can we find you?
Yeah, my website is beckyaikman.com. And so stuff is there. And as reviews and other things come out, it will get put on there. And I am on Facebook and Instagram. I don't do it as much as I should, but I can be found there. And I've been putting things on about the book that might interest people. I've been doing little snapshots of some of the characters, and
Oh, and that's Becky Aikman. Just your name.
I think I'm Becky Aikman on Facebook, and I'm Becky Aikman author on Instagram.
Perfect. Okay.
So people can find me there, and they can find little snippets about the women, and they can find blurbs that other writers have written about this book in
Yes,
advance.
I've
And
read a
it's,
few of
and
them,
it's
including
review.
one from Keith O'Brien. Very, very
Yes.
generous and flattering. I can't wait to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really lucky. A lot of people uh, did it for me, and I'm grateful to them for that. It takes a lot of people to help launch a book, and I've had a lot of great help that I appreciate.
Well, congratulations, Becky. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you. I cannot wait. This is going to be a book club read next year. I do the reading list a year out, so we'll definitely have it on the list next year and invite you to come to one of the discussions we have. And so, just to let you know, so the book club and the aviatrix literary aviatrix community is sort of big and broad and layered, but the book club itself, the people who actually show up are pretty tight group. Everybody is welcome. And that doesn't mean that it's exclusive in any way. It's just the people who have engaged with it, repeatedly. It's a small group, and on the last Sunday of the month, we always have a conversation that's early in the day in the U.S. so our friends in other countries can join us. And we have, when I went to that Maidenhead Museum, I also met several of the authors who I've interviewed from the UK and our book club members who participate. So we have friends from the UK, from the Netherlands, sometimes South Africa, join us on those conversations. And so we will definitely invite you back to do that.
That would be fun, and I think it's a great thing you're doing. Even
Thank
people
you.
who don't actually fly, I'm sure, would get a lot out of what you do. So I think it's wonderful.
Well, that we do have, a dedicated following within aviation, but really the point of this is to kind of show a critical mass of our voices to a broader audience so that they can be educated on what we do and what the possibilities are for the young people in their lives. So that is the point. And people like you who have the kind of backing that you have with your publicist and all of the work that you've done as a journalist and you bringing all of that to the story really improve our visibility in the world. So thank you so much for the work that you did on this book.
Well, I appreciate your kind words and I appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.